We got to get some breaking news out of D.C. Kayla Tausche's got the story. Kayla.
Melissa, the Biden transition said today that it expects to announce members of the economic team this time next week. But multiple sources are now telling me and CNBC's Brian Schwartz who is on that short list and for what roles. We are told by multiple sources that TIAA President and CEO Roger Ferguson is currently under consideration for Director of the National Economic Council. Ferguson has said he will retire at the end of March 2021, further fueling speculation about his intentions to join this administration. Number two, former Amex CEO and Chairman Ken Chenault is also being considered for what is described as a top economic role that was not immediately clear to either my sources or the sources that Brian Schwartz spoke to, but a very notable name to be added to this list. And finally, Gary Gensler, the former head of the top commodities organization here in Washington, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under President Clinton, and former Goldman Sachs executive Gary Gensler, who's advising the transition on regulatory policy, is under close consideration for Deputy Treasury Secretary. Previously, just a few weeks ago, he had been talked about potentially as SEC chairman, but now sources say he is being most closely looked at for Deputy Treasury Secretary. Now, Melissa, these names are notable for a few reasons. Number one, they all have experience working on Wall Street. Gensler, as I mentioned, formerly worked at Goldman Sachs. Ferguson obviously runs one of the most foremost asset managers in the country, and Chenault ran Amex for nearly 2 decades. Number two, the administration has been clear it wants to promote people of color to these top economic roles. Certainly Ferguson and Chenault would fit that bill. And then finally, they're most notable because of the age of the potential incoming Treasury Secretary in Janet Yellen, who is 74 years old. She has not been officially announced, but sources have confirmed that that is who the Biden team is expected to announce next week for Treasury. And as much as people, Melissa, talk about potentially Joe Biden only serving one term as president, they wonder how long Yellen would want to serve as Treasury Secretary. And the names that I just mentioned are being looked at as a very deep bench for the economic team and potential successors to Yellen if she does decide to step down before that 4 years is up.
All right, Kayla, thank you. Kayla Tausche with some interesting names there. Roger Ferguson, of course, floated as a potential Treasury Secretary pick, but before Janet Yellen was named. Gary Gensler sort of sticks out to me, Mike Khouw. He is known for cracking down on Wall Street banks during his tenure. And I'm wondering if you think that that changes how one would view Treasury and their willingness or desire to be tougher on financials.
I have to say, I'm not really terribly concerned about that going into this new administration. For one thing, I mean, financials really, relative to a lot of other sectors, since basically the credit crisis, in my view, have been significant laggards. And I think they've priced in a lot of sort of that type of pressure already. If anything, I'm probably a better buyer there. And, you know, typically this is a common refrain. We often talk about, you know, concerns about basically more onerous regulation or heavier fees or taxes or things on transactions. Those are the types of things that would concern me more. Those usually emerge from Congress. I'm not terribly concerned, though, I have to say. I'm still a net buyer of financials here. You
know, it's interesting because Gensler actually taught a course at MIT about Bitcoin and blockchain and is viewed as very friendly to that industry, to cryptocurrency. So that's sort of another interesting layer to this whole thing. Tim, what do you make of some of these potential picks?
Look, ultimately, I think the U.S. Treasury should be in charge of our currency, and therefore, you know, if they can figure out a solution on digital currency that allows the government to be in charge of the flow of currency, I think we're going to have it, and that's just my view on all this. I think, you know, the most important news of this week outside of vaccine news was Janet Yellen, and so the fact that we have a Treasury Secretary who has been a Fed chairman, has thought to provide more support for the economy during periods of stress, and comes out of a period of innovation where maybe even the Fed arguably has stepped way too far. I mean, you can make an argument that right now we're merging the Treasury and the Federal Reserve. Great for markets, terrible for our country. And I think it's just something that, at least in the short term, equities have found a lot of joy in. There's a push for fiscal that's going to come out of this Treasury that certainly isn't there on the way out right now. And I think when you combine that with a Fed Chairman Powell, who basically this is what he's been asking for, I think sum it up, this administration has diffused a lot of the market-oriented risk and the radical liberalism fears, whether they are right or wrong, that were surrounding a change in the White House. And so far, the market's gotten almost everything they could ask for.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.